In this video, we will be building a simple React application, as you can see on the screen. So this React application has a navigation bar, and we have built 4 components and 4 pages. And we have linked all these 4 pages to the navigation bar with the help of React Router DOM. And in this simple project, we will try to implement Redux and see how Redux can be used as a state management tool in your React applications. For simplicity, I have divided this project into 2 parts. In part 1, we will be building all these components: homepage, news page, contact, and about us page with the help of React Router DOM. And in part 2 of the video, we will be implementing Redux into this application. I will be leaving timelines in the description. Feel free to skip to any part of the video which you are more interested to learn. Guys, I have created a new project. As you can see on the screen, it's Redux tutorial, and this is a fresh React application which is running on my local host. So to begin with, let us go to the code editor and let's go to app.js and let's remove all the default content in this application. And for now, we can say hello world just to see if our application is running perfectly. So yes. So the application is running fine. Now we are going to go to the code editor and create some components under source folder. So let's create a folder called components. We are actually going to need few more folders inside the component. So the first folder would be home, and inside the first folder we can create home.js. Let's create another folder, about, and inside the about we can create file name about.js. Let's create news, and inside this news.js. And then lastly, let's create contact, and inside this contact.js. So we'll go one by one to each and every file and create a functional component of React. So we'll start with the home. So I can create a component home. Here I can say, hey, I am homepage. So this is ready. We can go to news. We can name it news, and we say, hey, I am news page. Next, let's go to contact. Let's rename this component as contact, and we say, hey, I am contact page. Same we are going to do for the about page. So we'll create a about component. We say here, I am about page. Okay. So very quickly, we have 4 components ready under the components folder. Now one by one, we are going to go to app.js and import all these components into app. So let's import home. Let's import about. Let's import news. And the last one is, let's import the contact. Okay, so we have created all the components, and we have imported all the components under the app. Now we can test this by placing these components under the app. Just to see if everything is working fine, we can place the home component under the app. Let's go and look at the output. So here it says I am home page. That means everything is working fine. There is no syntax errors. So now we have imported all the components into app.js. So in the next step, we are going to create a navigation bar. Let's go to Google. Let's search for navigation bar, HTML and CSS. So we are searching this in Google because we don't want to write HTML and CSS from scratch. So our goal is to find some good navigation bar and copy its HTML and CSS into our project. So I'm going to need horizontal navigation bar. So here we can see different kind of navigation bars on this website. So I think we can use this kind of navigation bar into the project. So we are going to apply this navigation bar. So here we can see we have all the HTML and CSS that we can use to create this kind of navigation bar. So let's copy this HTML. Let's go back to the code editor and let's copy all the HTML here. Let's correct the alignment properly and let's save this one. And again, I'm going to go back to the HTML and CSS and copy all the CSS from here. And I can go back to the code editor and let's copy all the CSS into the app.css. And let's check how this looks on the front end. For that, we need to go back to the local host. So you can see we have successfully created the navigation bar without writing in code, and it's a very good navigation bar that we can use in the project. So let's go back to the code editor and let's correct few things here in the. So first thing, we are going to remove any class here. We don't need class. And in the href, we are going to need home news contact about. So that's it. We have our navigation bar ready on the front end. Now what we need to do is when I click on the home page, I should be able to see the home component here, and when I click on news, I want to see the news component. So to do that we are actually going to need a package, and we are going to install React Router DOM. Installation of React Router DOM is complete. We are going to need few things that we are going to import from the React Router DOM. So one is browser router as router. The next is routes and the route. So we are going to need these components from React Router DOM. Now we can save it. So in order to implement the kind of logic where we can link our navigation bar to the components that we have imported, so that when I click on the home page on the navigation bar, I'm able to see the home component. And same for let's say I click on the about page, I should be able to see the about component. So for that, we need to make some changes here in the HTML. First thing is we are going to replace this div and enclose this entire code within the router. And we have imported this router here from React Router DOM. Now that's done. And inside this, we are going to create routes. Because we have multiple routes, so we want to create a lot of routes inside this. And let's create our first route. And this route is going to have two properties. One is we need to specify the path. So I want to specify that if I go to /home on my website, so here we have already given a href home. So when I click on the navigation bar, I go to /home and I can link it to the component, which is element. And I can say if somebody goes to home page of the website, I've linked this to the home component. And let's save this and let's go back to the front end and see if everything is working fine. So I'm going to click on the home page. So here you can see I'm able to see the home page. But if I click on news contact about, I still don't see anything. If I click on the home page, I can see the home component here. So in order to clearly see all the components, I'm going to apply some CSS to all my components. I'm going to just apply some width and the background color so we can see clearly on the screen what we are achieving here. So let's go back to the Visual Studio Code. I'm going to apply some styling to each and every component here. Start with the about. So styling, first thing I'm going to give it some height, let's say 300 pixels, and I want to give it a background color. Let's give this a green. Now let's align the text to center. Let's apply this styling to each and every component. But we are going to keep a different color for each and every component so we can distinguish well on the front end. On the home page, I can say it's orange. On the news page, let's give it green. So I applied some styling to all the components. Let's go back to the front end and we can see the styling is working fine. If I click on home page, this is how my home page looks like. Now we need to complete our routes for all the links on the navigation bar. Let's do that. Let's go back to app.js. So now we have created just a route for /home and we linked it to the home component. Let's copy this 3 more times because we have in total 4 components. Let's name it about, link it to the about component. Let's link news to news component. Let's link contact to contact component. Let's save it and go to the front end and test everything is working fine. So if I click on home page, I see home page. On news, I see news page. Contact, I see contact. About, I see about page. So we have completed part 1 of the video, and in the next part we are going to implement the Redux as a state management tool in this application. So guys, in part 1 of the video we built this simple application where we have 4 pages: home, news, contact and about page. So in the next step we are going to implement Redux in this application. So to start with, we are going to need to install few packages in this application. So let's go back to the Visual Studio Code and install few packages in the terminal. So we actually need just 2 packages. One of them is Redux and the second one is React Redux. And these 2 packages should be enough to implement Redux in this application. We are done with installing all the packages that we need. Let's discuss what is the difference between the React as a state management tool and React hooks that we use as a state management tool and the Redux. Now we are done installing all the packages. Let's discuss what is the difference between the usual React hooks that we use as a state management versus Redux. What is the benefit of Redux over React hooks? So in React hooks, if I want to use any of the state variable in any of the component, so I define it in that file, that component file. Let's say I need some state that I want to use in the about component, so I define it here as a variable, state variable. And if I want some state to be used in the contact, then I define it in this file. So all the states are defined in the components itself. Now the challenge comes, let's say what is the challenge that we are not able to solve in React hooks? So one of the main challenges, if there is a state that is defined in about component and I want to use this variable in the contact.js, it will make it very complicated because there's one way of doing that with the help of props. But in that case, these components must have a parent-child relationship. If I want to pass state variable from about to the contact page, then the contact must be the child of about component. But in this case, you can see all the components are independent and there is no parent-child relationship between these components. So we need a way to define global variables which we can use in the entire application without worrying about the relationship, without creating any messy relationship between the components. This goes well until your application is small scale, but when the application becomes too huge and complicated, it's hard to create all those relationships between the components and manage the passing of variables from one component to another with the help of props. It becomes too complicated. That's where Redux comes in. In Redux, what we can do is we can define all the variables, the global variables that we want to use in the entire application in one single file. And we can use these variables in any of the components without any issues, even if these components are independent and have no parent-child relationship. And that's what we are going to learn in the upcoming section, in which file actually we need to define all the global variables and how to import all these variables into any of the component we want without worrying about any kind of relationship between the components. So guys, if you remember from the React hooks, if I want to define any state variable, this is how I define it. A variable set variable use state. So this is how we define the state variable in a normal React hooks way, where we define a variable. We also have a function with the help of which we can change the value in this variable, and we use a use state to define a variable in a normal React hooks. So if we want to do that in a Redux way, how we will do that? In Redux, we define the variable and the functions that we use to change the value in the variable in two separate files. So to do that, we are going to need two extra files in the source directory. So inside the source, we need to create two files. One is actions.js and another is reducer.js. Now, what is the purpose of actions.js and reducer.js? In reducer.js, we are going to define all the states. And in actions.js, we are going to define all the functions that we are going to use to change the value of those states. So let's work on the reducer.js first. In this file, we will be defining all the states that we want to use in our React application. So let's define an initial state variable, and I can define any variable which I can name as my first Redux state, and I can initialize this with the value of anything I want right now. And after this, I'm going to define a function which is root reducer. Now I'll be writing a lot of syntax here. If you don't understand the syntax, don't worry about it. Once we complete our reducer file and the actions file, you will be able to connect the dots, how things are moving in Redux and how the state is being initialized and reassigned. So for now, let's work with me on this function. So in this root reducer function will take two variables. One of the variable it will take is a state, and we are going to initialize it with the initial state which we have defined here at the top. And the second variable it's going to take is action, and for now we'll initialize it with the empty object. Now you might be wondering what is action. So don't worry about this, just consider it as a second parameter that we are passing to the function. When we complete this function and go back to the actions file, then you will be able to understand what exactly is action. So inside this we are going to write some code. So inside this we are going to write a switch statement. We are going to switch on action.type. In the first case, we will say if the case is change my first Redux state. In that case, we are going to return something. And what we are going to return, I'll just write it in a second. But by default, this function is going to return a state. So in this function, what we are doing is this is a function which takes two parameters, the initial state and the action. And we say that if action.type is equal to change my first Redux state, then we are going to return something. But if action.type is not equal to change my first Redux state, this function is going to return the state as it is. So it's going to return the state as it is passed to the function without doing any changes on this variable. But if action.type is this, we want to make some changes on the state. And I'm going to write some syntax and later I will explain it what this syntax means. So in this case, this is going to return this object. So now you might be wondering what this complicated syntax means. Object.assign, and then there is an empty object. It is taking state as a parameter and then it's doing something on the state. So let's understand this syntax, what this is doing. In order to do that, let's go to the console of our application. In the console, let's understand what that syntax is. So let me define initial state here, just as we defined in the code editor. So here I will say my first Redux state. Let me give it a value of 1. So if I look what is initial state, it is this object and with the key my first Redux state, and it has a value of 1. Now let me write the syntax that we have written there, object dot assign the empty object and the initial state, and in the end we are going to say my first Redux state 2. Let me reassign it to the value of 2. So if I run this, so it returns me the state with the value of 2. So what the syntax is basically doing is it is changing the state value from 1 to 2, and it is returning the state object which has a state variable which is named as my first Redux state, and its value is changed from 1 to 2. So let's go back to the editor. So in this complicated syntax, what I'm doing is I'm defining the initial state. I'm saying the initial state is, this is the value I assign to the initial state, and in this function I'm saying that if I'm passing the variable action, if action dot type is equal to this, then change my state to action dot payload. Now let's see what this action is actually. This action, we are using two properties here, action dot type, action dot payload. So from where this action will be coming into this function, and that will be coming from actions.js. So here we are going to define a function, set my first Redux state, and this function will look something like this. So in this function there is type. This type has to be same as change my first Redux state, and this also needs a payload, and payload should be the data that's coming into this function. Let's save this. So what exactly we are doing here, we have defined a state here, my first Redux state, and we have defined a function, set my first Redux state in actions.js. So when this function will be called from any of the components, we will be passing data to this function, and this data from this file will be passed on to this function. The entire action will be passed on to this function, and if the action.type will be change my first Redux state, then it will reassign the value of state to action.payload. And what is payload? Payload is basically a data coming into this function. So that's all we need to define a state in Redux. Now let's try to import this state in all of the components, and let's see how we can use this state in all the components of this React application. So now we have defined successfully our first Redux state in actions and the reducer.js. So now let's try and pass this state to all the components. For that, we need to make some changes in index.js. So here what we are going to do is we are going to import the root reducer function that we have defined in reducer.js, and we are going to import a function called create store from Redux, and we are going to import another function called provider from React Redux. If you remember, we have already installed both these packages in the beginning. So now let's create a store by using this function create store and passing a root reducer to the store. And what we are going to do, we are going to wrap this app component inside the provider. Let's wrap the app component properly inside the provider, and to this provider we are going to pass a variable called store that we have created here. Now you might be wondering what exactly is this store. By writing these 4-5 lines of code, basically what we have done is we have created a store which is a collection of all the states that we have defined in reducer, and we have passed this entire store to app. Basically we have passed this entire store to all the components. Now by making these little changes in index.js, we should be able to use our states that have been defined in reducer.js in any of the components we want in this React application. To test my claims, let's try this in home.js. So in home.js, first we need to do is we need to import two functions, use selector, and there's another function, use dispatch from React Redux, and we are going to import the function that we have defined here, set my first Redux state from. So we have imported this functions from actions.js. Now we are going to make use of these two functions, use selector and use dispatch, inside the home component. So let's define a variable called dispatch, which is using a hook called use dispatch. And let's try to access the state that we have defined in reducer.js. And its name is my first Redux state. So let's go to home.js. My first Redux state will be equal to use selector state to state dot my first Redux state. And if I try to console log my first Redux state, we should be able to see it on the front end. Let's go and check this in our console. Let me go to the home page. I think our server has been stopped, so let me go and restart the server. Okay, let's try this again. Let's go to the console and let's go to home component. So here you can see on the home component it has printed a state, the initial value of the state, which I defined it like this. So let's go back to the code editor and see what's happening on this component. So what we are doing is we are importing few functions from React Redux, and we have directly imported set my first Redux state from actions.js. And with the help of these two functions, by writing these two lines, we are able to access our state and console log it in the home component. So now what if I want to change the value of this state? How will I change the value of this state? Now the initial value of this state, if we can go and check in the reducer, it's hey. Now I want to reassign this state by using this function. Is there any way I can do that? Yes. So what I'll do is I'll put an on click function here, and I will say that on click I want to use this function and change the value of my state. Hey, I am revised. Okay, this is how we do in a normal React hooks, but there is an additional step that's required here in order to make it work with the Redux. We need to use a function called dispatch and wrap this around dispatch. So we have wrapped this entire function within dispatch. So what we have done is on click, it will change the value of the state to this. So let's try this. Let's save it. Let's go to the home function. We can say the value is this. What if I try to click on this? Okay, it looks like this is not working because probably this function is not imported well from the actions. We can go back and check what we are doing wrong here. If we go and check this set my first Redux state. So what we have forgot to mention the keyword called export here, and because of this we are not able to import this function in the home component. Now let's make this change and save this and go back, try again. Now let's click on this. Now you can see the initial value of the state was this. This is the revised value of the state. Okay, now we have been able to access this state in home.js, but actually I should be able to access this state in any of the components. So if I want to access this state in, let's say, contact, so I just have to copy this chunk of code and do the same steps in contact. So I will just copy everything, all the lines I've written here, and I will paste it in contact. I can even copy this on click function, paste it in the contact. Here I can change the value to I am revised from contact page. Now let's save this. Let's go back to the browser and check. If I go to home, I can see the value is this. If I click on this, the value is this. Again, if I go to contact, the initial value is this. If I click on this, so this is the revised value. I'm revised from the contact page. So now we can see we did some hard work in setting up Redux in our application. But after all this hard work, we are now able to use any of the state in any of the component we want by just writing 3 to 4 lines of code here. And this is why Redux is so powerful, and it makes our applications much more organized and easy to work with. Now we discussed that we define all the states of the application in one single file, but really if you see, we have only defined one state here. Now what if we want to define one more state? It's very simple now, because we have done all the hard work and set up the Redux once. Now it makes it very simple. I can say my second Redux state hello. So this is how easy it is to define a state, and I just have to add one more case scenario here, and this should say change my first to change my second Redux state, and here I'm going to say my second Redux state. That's all. We are done in reducer.js. We added the second state very simply by adding 2-3 lines here. And now we can go back to actions. We can just copy this function, paste it, and in place of first, we can say my second Redux state. And here we can say my second Redux state. So now this time if I will call this function will take the data and fire this action, which is change my second Redux state. And this action will be passed on to reducer, and reducer will see that my action.type is equal to change my second Redux state, and based on this it will make a change in my second Redux state and leave my first Redux state as it is. It will not make any changes there. So now we have defined our second state in actions and reducer. Let's go back to home and test how we can access my second Redux state. So here it's very simple. We can create another variable like that, and we can access it here. And now let's console log both these states together. Let's go back to the browser and see if it all worked. So in the browser, to test this, I have to go to home page. So now you can see it's already working. This is our first state and this is second state. So I really hope that you understand the concept of Redux very clearly from this entire video. If you have any queries regarding this, you can leave it in the comments. But don't forget to subscribe to this channel for such interesting topics on React and Node.js. Thank you so much.